The way skills work in Guild Wars 2 is significantly different to what we saw in its predecessor, Guild Wars 1, and in fact I don't think you'll find anything like it in other MMOs either. Once again, I'm here to talk about the worries people have got. So in Guild Wars 1, there were 1,319 skills that could be arranged into 8 slots on a skill bar. It was completely up to you what you decided to use, and there were almost endless possibilities. That's because in addition to the profession you picked at the start of the game, you could also spec into any other one you wanted. There were some restrictions in place, but pretty much any weapon, any skill, no matter how good or bad, was open for use. Amazing, right? Fast forward to Guild Wars 2. Now we have no secondary professions. We do have 10 skills to use, but 5 of those are chosen for us by our weapon. And there are other limits too. We also have far less than the lofty Guild Wars 1 target of 1,319. So where's the customization gone? Where's the choice gone? This is boring, this sucks, it's the end of the world. Well, maybe not quite. I've boiled down what I consider to be just 4 convincing reasons for why these changes have been made. The developers clearly had something in mind when they did it, so what was it? And no, I don't think they were simply dumbing down the game for casuals. So here goes. Reason 1. Build viability. Yes, in Guild Wars 1 there were a lot of choices to make out of a vast skill pool, but in 99% of cases the resulting build would suck. There's a funny story in the Guild Wars community that always springs to my mind when people talk about this. When the game was first released, you could open the case and read about the game. On the inside cover was a character build that demonstrated the skill system. The bar in question was described as a deadly combination. It was a warrior who could shoot with a bow, cripple their foes with a hamstring attack, then rain fire, ice and lightning down on their location as the fleeing enemy tried to escape. Sounds cool, but it was laughably bad. To the point where, to this day, years later, players troll each other by trying to use it, and ArenaNet themselves have openly mocked it. The restrictions in place for Guild Wars 2 are designed to stop this from happening. A player must be able to keep themselves alive. They must use an elite skill. While the result may be that there's less choice, it actually means there are far more viable choices than there ever were in the first game. And that means that your day-to-day adventuring can be filled with more than running around with the same skill set for hours on end. In fact, changing builds is encouraged to the point now where swapping weapons in combat is standard practice. So you could claim, and a lot of people do claim this, that we have access to 15 skills in fights and not just 10, which is almost double what Guild Wars 1 had. One criticism I often hear on this point though is people saying, well, so what if there were a load of bad builds in Guild Wars 1? If I want to run those, if that's what's fun to me using those skills, then let me do it. And while I find that to be a reasonable stance, that's perfectly fine, I think it's got something to do with how your decision to play ineffectively can actually negatively affect the experience of everyone else around you. And I know that's a bit of a sticky subject, but I do think that just enforcing a baseline somewhere is a pretty good step to take in a game where they've done so much to try and make grouping up simple and fun. Reason 2. Balance. The reason why so many of those Guild Wars 1 builds weren't viable wasn't just because players were making poor decisions. It was a straight up balance issue. 1,319 is a big number. Keeping that many abilities in line with one another is an ungodly amount of effort, especially when so many skills affected each other in different ways. The developers are doing a lot to help them with balance in the second game, and the skill system is only a part of that, but I think it's a big one. Because by partitioning skills, by putting them into groups on weapons, they make the whole process far easier. For example, a warrior with a bow can be compared to a ranger with a bow. Bows can then be compared to swords, wands to staffs, and so on and so on. In this way, it's really easy to keep all weapons in a profession in line, and then it's also easy to keep all the professions in line with each other as well. In the end, it also helps with future-proofing the game too, as when expansions are released, adding in a new weapon or something won't throw everything out of whack. Any players of the original game will remember just how crazy things got every time a new campaign was pushed through the doors. Yeah. Reason 3. Distinction. As I said, we can no longer have a secondary profession. That was initially seen as a pretty exciting feature of the first game, and recent MMOs are still implementing all kinds of multi-class concepts. But Guild Wars 2 is going back to basics, and it's all to do with making players feel unique. See, in the first game, all professions stood on each other's toes. Everyone had something unique, whether that be the elementalists who had more energy, or the warriors who could hit a lot harder. But ultimately, because the skills we used crossed over so much, the difference between playing a Mesmer and, say, a Curse's Necromancer could be negligible. Giving players just a single class means that everyone can feel distinctly different when they roll another character, which makes rolling ults more fun, and it also means you can become a lot more attached to your favourite profession once you've learned exactly what they can do. But this isn't just a matter of removing secondary classes. Where the total skill pool is also lower now, ArenaNet can make sure each and every individual skill feels different. For example, a Necromancer minion can feel different to an Elementalist's Familiar, or a Thief who has Stealth to escape can feel different to a Mesmer who could use Portals to escape. Less skills means that players can have their own mechanics, which are appropriately balanced and have their own flair without the risk of stepping on someone else's feet. Reason 4. Traits. Everything I've said so far doesn't really address the problem of two different players of the same profession feeling unique from one another. Two Guardians with hammers are being forced to use the same weapon skills, so how do they become distinct? Yeah, there are utility skills which you can pick and choose, but then again, they tend to have really long cooldowns and there's way less emphasis on them during combat. So is it really enough? Well, ArenaNet do seem to be catering to people with this mentality. Players can equip traits, or perks if you will, as they level up, which can modify the way skills work in different ways. For example, a lightning strike may be traded to then strike multiple targets at once, or it could blind someone. Personally, I'm not convinced this system will add as much depth to the game as it seeks to. I think that either traits will become really powerful skill modifiers, in which case players are going to determine exactly which the best ones are and then discriminate against everyone who doesn't have the correct setup, or they'll become really minor fluff skills, and that avoids the problem of players discriminating harshly, but then if they're only minor fluff, then who really cares about them in the first place? This may or may not be how things end up, but I'd argue we don't need traits at all. Utility skills, yes, they do have long cooldowns, but some of them also provide passive effects which will constantly affect things. And not to mention elites, which are massive game changers that can drastically affect the battle. The equipment people use and the attributes they've spent will also both have a huge impact on what your character's like, not to mention the fact that if there really are two Guardians fighting each other, you'll both be encouraged to swap roles on the fly to complement each other's abilities. It's going to be the decisions you make, your skill at the game, that will set you apart from other people more than anything else. So yeah, at first it might look like Guild Wars 2 is taking a step backwards with its more structured skill system. But look at it for a second longer and I think it's enough to convince me, at least, that no, this is not the end of the world. Thanks for watching. If you guys have got any problems with what I just said here, if you think I've been completely stupid about something or I've missed something massive, please feel free to let me know, because later on in the week I'm going to be doing a follow-up video where I go into more detail about those kinds of things and picking out some of your comments. So yeah, thanks again.